Okay, third recording of the day, K81.htm, talking about Michael Denton. Michael Denton, molecular biologist. He's an agnostic. He wrote a book, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, 1985. Still a good book. He's talking about the extreme complexity then of that simple cell. When we evaluate that, though we think about an airplane, which is so not nearly so complex, you can describe it in much less than the Library of Congress. The words in the books, all the books. Compare that with a simple cell. We don't think that airplane happened by itself. Furthermore, one of the world's most famous scientists says the likelihood can be calculated, and it's about like assuming that a tornado would go through a junkyard and produce a 747. That doesn't happen. The simple cell, so-called, is much more complex. But worse than that, just complexity, much more so than the airplane, it is interdependent complexity. Interdependent complexity. An article recently in American Scientist emphasized the interconnected nature of DNA and enzymes. The replication of DNA requires precise enzymes. The precise enzyme required DNA. How do you get these enzymes? That's a whole string precisely lined up in precise order, folded in a precise way. How do you get that order? Well, you have the DNA to tell you how to do it. Well, how do you get the DNA? You have to have the enzymes. Well, how do you get that naturally? Well, you don't. You see, the problem of interconnectivity, and that's just a small portion of it, because you have to have an information storage system. You have to have the reading system. You have to have the information duplicating system, the energy system, the membrane system, and you don't have any of these systems without all these systems together all at once. If you had all of that, but you didn't have the duplicating system, you'd be out of luck. A little cooler now. If you had all of this without the membranes, semi-permeable membranes, it wouldn't work. And if you had all of it without the energy system, it wouldn't work. Each system is incomprehensibly complex and interdependent upon the other. And that reminds us that Mr. Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, he says, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, it has. Well, we see the problem here. Darwin says if you can't lead up to it gradually, adding a little bit more complexity, a little bit more, my theory won't work. Well, here's an example. All of this intercomplexity must be extant at once or none of it works. There's no way to imagine that so-called simple cell. Francis Crick, Nobel laureate, in his book Life Itself, published in '81. An honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, can only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. How do you explain it naturally? Well, you really can't explain it naturally. In terms of the very beginning of this horse race between evolution and creation, when you look at the actual facts, at the very beginning of the race you ring the bell, you swing the gate open, and the evolution horse drops dead. It doesn't even get out of the gate. You can't get evolution started. Origin of life just looks not natural. It looks like a miracle. How about the Bible? Creative designer, intelligent designer. And when we depend on the facts, the evidence, honestly searching for the truth, you just have to say naturally, and in the realm of the natural that, you can't explain it. It calls for another kind of explanation. A sudden, complex beginning without gradual development fits the facts best. And Dr. Patton goes on to say, we're warned by David Raup about this when he says, one of the ironies of the creation-evolution debate is that the creationists have accepted the mistaken notions that the fossil record shows a detailed, orderly progression, and they have gone to great lengths to accommodate this fact into their flood geology. He, of course, points out that there is no such thing. So the Christians that go along with the evolution just to go along to get along, there isn't any great lengths, a great fossil record showing a detailed, orderly progression. So this David Raup, He, of course, points out that there is no such orderly organization, and that you don't have to have an explanation for detailed orderly progression because it does not exist. He readily acknowledges that. He's an evolutionist. It is a mistaken notion, as he tells us, so he one-ups the Christian, who backs down and doesn't want to believe the Bible. Compare the rest of this quotation from Dr. Patton's notes. A large number of well-trained scientists outside of evolutionary biology and paleontology have unfortunately gotten the idea that the fossil record is far more Darwinian than it is. This probably comes from the oversimplification inevitable in secondary sources, low-level textbooks, semi-popular articles, and so on, and just wanting to stay with a popular opinion. Also, there is probable some wishful thinking involved. And the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions, but they never came. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks. You ever seen the horse evolution? The big horses in the front and the little horses in the beginning. No. What we see when we look at the fossil record is billions and billions of dead things and rocks laid down all over the world, never in the same sequence precisely. We're living in a veritable graveyard, billions of dead things and rocks laid down by water all over the world. It's eloquent testimony to the fact that there was a great catastrophe, the worldwide flood, all at once, and that's why we have the disorder. The millions of fossils that we see in the museums around the world and in the rocks provide convincing proof for creation, certainly evidence that would sustain that concept. Let's begin with a statement made by S.M. Stanley, paleontologist from Johns Hopkins. He says, "It's doubtful whether in the absence of fossils, the idea of evolution would represent anything more than an outrageous hypothesis. The fossil record, and only the fossil record, provides direct evidence of major sequential changes in the Earth's biota." Actually, it doesn't, but he's wishful thinking. I hope you'll remember the statement that it's just an outrageous hypothesis if you don't have the fossils. I think he's absolutely right, and I think the evolutionists, don't have the fossils. There is direct evidence for creation that's provided here. If evolution is true, then we should see the simple, slow beginning gradually increasing in complexity over time. On the other hand, if creation is true, then we would see a sudden and complex beginning and a wide variety of creatures from the start, which we see in the Cambrian rock strata, below which there are no fossils. Sudden creation of explosion of ice, vertebrates and invertebrates. Let's begin as we look at what the facts are with a statement by Stephen Jay Gould, perhaps the best-known paleontologist in the United States today, writing in his recent book, Wonderful Life, published in '89. He says, in a geological moment near the beginning of the Cambrian is that bottom layer at the bottom of the geological column, below which no fossils appear, nearly all modern phyla made their first appearance. The 500 million subsequent years have produced no new phyla. Wow, when you get to that point, which is a beginning, an explosion of life, as he calls it in the same article, you have nearly all of the modern main divisions of life forms that we have in biology. And there have been no new phyla since then, only twists and turns upon established designs, he says. Oh, intelligent designer, variation on the theme. So we have the basic designs in place in the geological moment, in the beginning of the Cambrian right at the bottom of the geological column. Stephen Gould also says, one outstanding fact of the fossil record that many of you may not be aware of, that since the so-called Cambrian explosion, during which essentially all of the anatomical designs of modern multicellular life made their first appearance in the fossil record, no new phyla of animals have entered the fossil record. Take a little drink here, my protein drink. Good stuff. So, consider the statement made by Preston Cloud and Martin Glessner, authors of major textbooks in geology writing in Science. They say, ever since Darwin, the geologically abrupt appearance and rapid diversification of early animal life have fascinated biologists and students of Earth history alike. Its abrupt appearance, its rapid diversification, in other words, many different diverse kinds in the beginning. Sounds like Genesis chapter 1. Compare quotations from Dr. Patton's notes. The more remarkably complex forms of animals we see today suddenly appeared. This moment, right at the start of the Earth's Cambrian period, marks the evolutionary explosion that filled the seas with the Earth's first complex creatures. This is Genesis material, gushed one researcher. Really. Demonstrates that the large phyla, animal phyla of today, were present already in the early Cambrian, and that they were distinct from each other as they are today, a menagerie of claim cousins, sponges, segmented worms, and other invertebrates that would seem vaguely familiar to any scuba diver today. No evolution, just repeating the theme. And we find that many of them already in an advanced state of evolution the very first time they appear. It is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. The only alternative explanation of the sudden appearance of so many complex animal types in the Cambrian era is divine creation. Richard Dawkins, the blind watchmaker, he wrote that. This interval, plus early Cambrian, was the time during which metazoan life, i.e. more than one cell, diversified into nearly all of the major phyla and most of the invertebrate classes and orders subsequently known. Not only do we have nearly all of the major divisions, we have nearly all the smaller divisions of classes and orders from the early part of the Cambrian defined by them as the beginning of the major diversification of life. Now, prior to the Cambrian, we have some little green algae and some bacteria. H.S. Ladd, University of California, Davis, put it this way. He said, most paleontologists today give little thought to fossiliferous rocks older than the Cambrian, thus ignoring the most important missing link of all. Indeed, the missing Precambrian record cannot properly be described as a link, for it is in reality about 9/10 of the chain of life, the first 9/10. We have the end of the chain of life, with variation of the theme thereafter. And where's the missing Precambrian record? Not there. Maybe it never was. And his evaluation, 9/10 of the evolution of life is already in place when you get to the Cambrian. Before that, what? Well, according to evolutionists, the record is missing. Well, who stole the missing record? That, of course, assumes that there was such. There's no evidence for it. They're both saying what the creationists would predict, that when you start, you basically have all of the kinds. 6 days. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John E. Repetsky points out that the oldest land plants now known are from the early Cambrian. Approximately 60 Cambrian spore genera, now on record, represent 6 different groups of vascular plants. If you read your textbook, it will tell you that the Cambrian involved only shallow seas all over the world, that there were no land areas anywhere. But now then, we've got 60 spore genera of land plants, 6 different groups of vascular plants without the land. Those are plants that have wood. Well, then you've got land somewhere, but they haven't bothered to change the textbooks. Furthermore, we notice from Daniel Axelrod, UCLA, writing in Science, he says, this report of fish material from Upper Cambrian rocks further extends the record of the vertebrates by approximately 40 million years. They keep adjusting their theories because they keep finding something that's different all over the world. And this was published in 1978. This has been known a while, yet it is not in the textbooks. The vertebrates are way up in the column, way on up. They are very complex organisms. They belong to the same phylum that we do. But we find them in the Cambrian with nearly all of the other major phyla. In fact, the reason that most people say nearly all of the major phyla is that they don't acknowledge or perhaps don't know that the Cambrian also includes the vertebrates, supposedly the highest order that we are a part of. More on this next time.